Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to talk to the BAHS, a group who I've admired from afar for many years. So I'm very honoured, actually. Right, this is a walk, so I hope you've got your walking shoes on and a scarf tightly around your neck. I got into the history of South View really when the Heritage Society got very involved with the conservation area status, which the council did some years ago. And also partly because as the Heritage Society, we do field an awful lot of questions from all over the world, which are to do with the town. So South View, so we're starting off really in Burgess Road. We're in Burgess Road, just outside the entrance to the old cemetery there. And in the middle of the 19th century, all the land here belonged to John May and Co, the brewers, probably used for growing fodder crops and as pasture for the horses from the brewery. The May family had owned the land since the enclosures in about 1788. And before that, these were basically the town fields, Norden or Northfield. Between this field and the town was Chapel Field, from where Holly Ghost Street, as Chapel Street was then known, led down to the valley bottom. So like so much of Basingstoke's history, the story of South View begins with the railway. In many ways, I think, almost a bigger upheaval than the expansion in the 1960s. It was initially the project of one man, the son of a family of gunsmiths from Padworth. The railway arriving in 1837 from London brought great changes. The coaching in business went into free fall. The town's great coaching inns, the Crown and the Angel, disappeared. Land south of the town, Fairfields, no longer had to provide grazing for the many horses involved in his busy trade. Development was about to hit the town, and not for the last time. So let's have a look at John Burgess Soper. So here we have Soper himself in his splendid portrait, which the council have. This is John Burgess Soper, born in Padworth in 1821, one of 14 children. He was given his grandmother's name of Burgess. And if you know South View, we will recognise his family names being used there. His father, Richard, had been in business in Basingstoke in 1841 as a gunsmith, and his brother Walter invented the Soper rifle and had a business in Friar Street in Reading. In 1841, John Burgess Soper was in London working as a whitesmith, making gas fittings and metal objects. Gas fittings were going to be particularly useful, obviously, as he developed South View. By 1846, he was in Basingstoke as both a gunsmith and a whitesmith. And I am just going to show his house at this point because we'll come back to it later, because obviously this is the only image we have of it. And this, of course, was after the Massaganian rioters had turned up and done terrible things to it. He bought the land here in 1867. And in 1869, he put the first plots on sale by auction. 2 years before, in 1867, he sold a site to the Eastrop Waterworks Company for £250 to permit the reservoir in Darlington Road, including providing a road to it with access to the Great Western Railway Station. He called this road Soper's Road, although later it became Vine Road, and the reservoir is still there. In 1868, so the year before, when the London and South Western region widened their upline platform, 25 foot was taken from the southern edge of the cemetery, and the railway company had to pay for exhumation and reburial. The Corporation of Basingstoke agreed at that point to widen the arch of the Vine Road tunnel to 20 feet, presumably at this point, making Vine Road as it is today. The most recent addition, in 2012, is the Station Master's Garden in Vine Road, with a new level entrance into the cemetery. I mean, actually the house opposite belonged to the Great Western Railway Station agent, so it's strictly speaking the agent's allotment garden. These houses in Burgess Road are, I believe, the very first ones that Soper built as part of his development. They have stone staircases, as do Gladstone villas in Soper Grove. Soper had a fear of fire in houses and he was keen on stone staircases. This is the 1869 first auction, and you can see from here, now if I'm clever I'll be able to find this printer options thing. So this is my laser pointer, and you can see that here we have Vine Road, and obviously here we have the cemetery. This is the first big house really that was laid out. This is where Queen Mary Avenue is today. This is Phoenix Park Terrace. This is now Vine Meadow Car Park. So he built Southview House, which was a large house. It was a gentleman's residence really, with some cottages and paddock, an orchard, stable and all the rest of it. Whether he intended it for himself or not, we don't know. There's no evidence that he ever lived there, although he did occupy one of the cottages at one time. In 1875, which is the earliest that I have any reference to this house, which incidentally gave the area its name as Southview, it was then occupied by William H. Bailey. In 1880, Southview House was up for auction, plus a cottage and 30 plots for housing. So it didn't really stay. That was the trouble with it. It didn't really remain as a big house. It was an issue. So here's Southview House as it was. Anybody who delves into local history will come across William Henry Bailey at some point. He was a lawyer by profession, and his name lived on in a legal partnership until relatively recently with Bailey Manton Kingdom. He was the clerk of everything and on every board. He later built Sherbourne House for his family, which is a lucky survivor in this much obliterated town. He and his wife Sophia had 9 children, the 9th, called Nona, which seemed a bit unimaginative. Poor Sophia died in a subsequent childbirth and is buried in Southview. In 1918, Southview House became a boys' home known as a boys' garden colony. The boys worked at Schroeder's nurseries in Winchester Road, presumably learning useful skills. Roger Uptwell, and I see you're there, Roger, hello, who has done interesting research, found out that the colony was established on the initiative of the London Police Court Mission, which in turn was linked to the Church of England Temperance Society. In 1932, the trustees sold the house and it became a boys' home. Then it was turned into flats and eventually demolished when Wheel Court flats for elderly people were built by Hanover Housing Association. Alas, there is a story about one of the boys, a bit older and back living in London, who came by train to attempt to rob the postmistress in Vine Road, but apparently she won. She saw him off. So this is Sherbourne House, which we will come later when we walk round that way. So we'll come to that. That was W.H. Bailey built that house. A little further up Vine Road, on the corner with what is now Queen Mary Avenue, were racing stables. There were stables for hunters on the corner of Vine Road and Queen Mary Avenue, belonging to various people, but at this point to a chap called Prince. Queen Mary Avenue was the town boundary, and then beyond this point, we got into the Duke of Bolton's land. And at the east end of Queen Mary Avenue was Bolton Lodge, marking another boundary. North of Darlington Road was all part of Eastrop Parish. These stables are in a photo by Terry Hunt, whose legacy is the many photos he took of the town and villages from the early 1900s to the 1930s. Many of his glass plate negatives survive at the Hampshire Record Office and are a fantastic record of the town and villages round about. He lived for many years in Vine Road in a house called Van Dyke, which no doubt reflected his artistic work. His photo of the stables was labelled at the Record Office as the Prince's hunting stables, which was confusing. Prince was both a horse dealer and provided stabling. An oral history from a long-lived local person, Millie Day, tells us that as a child she and others used to go over the fields at Oakbridge to pick up any sharp flints so that the horses could exercise safely. This is Prince's house, and actually this sign, although it's difficult to read, does say Prince on it. This is 36 Vine Road, which is still there today. It's been turned into flats, and I have to say we did fight to make sure it wasn't demolished a few years ago. So we're going a little further up in our imagination. We're walking up Vine Road to the where it turns into Darlington Road. On the 26th of November 1924, the Times of London reported the verdict of what became known as the Cornfield murder. This tragic event took place at the north end of Vine Road. On August the 13th, the body of Mrs. Lucy Fisher was found by a couple walking on the footpath leading from Basingstoke to Sherbourne St John. The victim lived with her husband in Lancaster Road in the then quite new council houses. Her husband worked in Percy Fisher's Leatherworks, which was just at the junction of Sherbourne and Kingsclear Road. Her murderer, whose name was William Edward Matthews, was considered unstable, and the verdict was guilty but insane, and he was to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. He had lived with his mother in Queen's Road and was 24 at the time of the murder. He had served in the Royal Marines but had been discharged because of his poor mental health. Turning into Darlington Road is St Thomas's. In 1874, a site of 3 acres was bought by Winchester Diocese with an option to buy 2 more. The Church of England was very concerned about the plight of women, particularly in the naval ports and military towns where prostitution and abuse were rife. They built refuges and homes, this one as a home for friendless and fallen women. Admiral Ryder, whose dates are 1820 to 1888, was a key benefactor for the home in Basingstoke. It was to be a place where women whose lives had been ruined by prostitution or abuse could come to live and work. It had a large open quad like a cloister with 5 2-storey cottages for the inhabitants and a large laundry. It was partly destroyed by a fire in 1907. This was to give women the chance of recovering the character they have lost before God and society. I think what's interesting reading the report that was written about St Thomas's was that the girls and young women were sort of, they were housed with house mothers, and they were housed by degree of vice, which was interesting. I'd like to know who made those decisions. So women who were taken in at St Thomas's had to stay for 2 years, so they had to commit and would be trained in laundry and dairy work, cooking and needlework, as well as some basic studying. The women, many of whom were very young, lived in cottages with a house mother. 2 of the sisters who worked at St Thomas's, Sister Rachel and Sister Harriet, worked there until their deaths from overwork, and it is reputed to be the ghost of Sister Harriet, a lady in grey, who haunts the present-day nursing home. And they do think it does too. The women were not allowed to go home, or if they did, they would not be readmitted. Often their mothers would plead for them to go home and help with the care of their younger siblings or a new baby, but it was known that if they did, the cycle of abuse would lead them into their former lives. It wasn't cheap. In 1882, it cost £54.07 per woman per annum to keep a woman there, which is about £4,500 today. The history of the home, written by its second warden, the Reverend Reginald Bigwither, and if that name rings a bell with Jane Austen fans, he was the grandson of the wretched Harris who had proposed to Jane Austen, been accepted, and then turned down the next morning, causing a terrible fuss. Reginald Bigwither was appointed in 1878, and his history contains heartrending letters written by the women whose lives had been changed by their stay in St Thomas's. By 1885, there were 60 penitents in the home, as they were called, plus servants, workers, and sisters. The site was planted with 600 to 700 trees and shrubs, and the view at that time said to be 5 to 25 miles in every direction. Seems an exaggeration to me, but that's what they said. This is a detail of the chapel. On July the 22nd, 1884, a foundation stone for a chapel for 100 persons was laid. The architect was Henry Woodyer, who also had designed St Thomas of Canterbury at Worthing, as well as many other churches. The chapel was dedicated by the Bishop of Winchester on July the 21st in 1885, the eve of St Mary Magdalene's feast day. She is, of course, the patron saint of fallen women. This is Terry Hunt's view of the chapel, which is a very fine building. The home of, it was at one time full of junk, but Barchester seem to, on the whole, have it fairly tidy now and would like to use it. So when the plague goes away, we hope to be able to use it for community meetings. So by the time Terry Hunt took this, by the 1930s, the use for the house had changed and it became known as Mount Tabor Certified Institution, which was a different kind of home, sheltering people under the terms of the 1913 Mental Deficiency Act. But precisely when the diocesan home closed and Mount Tabor opened, I don't know. It's interesting that Terry Hunt's photos are labelled by him as a chapel at Mount Tabor, and although his photos are undated, they will probably not be much later than the mid-1930s. The Hampshire Record Office has references to Mount Tabor as being the home of the Congregation of the Sisters of the Transfiguration, an Anglican order, run under the auspices of the Winchester Diocesan Union for Preventive and Rescue Work. The women residents continued their laundry work. The late Mrs. Pink, who some of you will remember, who had lived in Richmond Road from about 1926, remembered the laundry carts going up and down Vine Road. In 1951, St Thomas's got its old name back as the School for the Deaf, which occupied the site until it closed in the mid-1980s. After that, the premises were used as a night shelter for the homeless, but suffered some vandalism and a fire. When the whole complex of buildings was threatened with demolition for redevelopment in 1989, a group of local people, led by the redoubtable Jean Miller, who lived opposite the home, fought a huge battle to save it and achieved statutory Grade 2-star listing for the chapel, and were eventually able to resist Hampshire County Council's intention to demolish the rest of the complex of buildings. Now a St Thomas's care home, run by Barchester Healthcare, it has a new and useful life. The Wardens House, where the Reverend Bigwither lived, has been divided into two homes, so this is just one half, and it has this inscription: "Unless the Lord shall have built this house, those who built it have laboured in vain." When I first saw that, I thought it was rather sweet, but it seems to have been fairly typically plastered onto Victorian houses. The house had a brief use in the 1950s to 60s as a home for unmarried mothers, in the days when young mothers were sent away from home and had their babies in the Shrubbery maternity home. The babies were then adopted. A reference in Taking the Pulse of Basingstoke, that very useful publication, and a comment by Nurse Jack recalls how the girls were treated respectfully and equally with the married mothers alongside them. Further along Darlington Road, we turn right up Conquer Alley, as it's known locally, into Whiteditch, and here we come rushing into the last century. Further on, so on Whiteditch, and Whiteditch, as I said, was once part of Eastrop, and I suspect it's been open space forever and ever and ever. Why is it called Whiteditch? It's been called Whiteditch for a long time, but obviously it's all on the chalk. Used for many years as a changing room, this building is a survivor of the Second World War. Its construction, along with another south of War Memorial Park, which actually, through the magic of Facebook, I've now been able to locate, because it turned out, some pictures turned up of lads painting the inside to use as a youth hut of the other building like this. And probably from people's memories, it was tucked just inside the park, which of course was before the park had sliced off by the ringway. So its construction, along with the other one at south of War Memorial Park, was ordered in August 1943 for the rather prosaic amalgamation of first aid and rescue parties. It occurred to someone that the first aid stuff and the rescue party equipment was scattered all over the town in different builders' yards and some at the council. Basingstoke Heritage Society did a lot of research on this building, and we got an expert opinion which told us that it was a gas decontamination unit, partly because of the water tower. which would have made it a particularly interesting survivor. So its purpose as a first aid and rescue party amalgamation hut was really more prosaic. And we got that through trawling through the council's ARP records to find that out. And it did survive because it's been used for years by the rugby club and other sports groups for changing. Civil Defence had a structure elsewhere on Whiteditch as well. A sort of two-storey ruin, it looked like, and young lads were given cakes to act as victims and be dragged up and down from the second storey. So we're going back down Sherbourne Road now, and here we are again at W.H. Bailey's house that he built. And this again has survived because it had a use as a health authority. After William Henry Bailey had moved to Hook, where he again built himself a new house, what is now Maryfield Convent residential home, this became the home of Charles Stevens, partner to Arthur Wallace of engineering renown, and it is his initials in the cartouche over the front door. So we've got a CJS. In 1906, he left the house to the company, which was then occupied for a while by another Wallace family member, Frank Wallace. Descendants of W.H. Bailey in Australia had a photo of a house which they which they knew was the English house of W.H. Bailey. And it took us ages to identify. And that turned out to be the house in Hook that Bailey had built. But they got in touch with the Heritage Society because they'd seen that the new flats in Darlington Road had the name Bailey House. Occasionally, we get asked if we can think of local reasons for the name of a new development. So we suggested Bailey House, which enabled a really interesting correspondence that went backwards and forwards about these families had gone to Tasmania. So the first building, so we're going now further down and we're going to turn into Richmond Road. So as I said, the first buildings in Southview were in Burgess Road and another in Cromwell Road, but these three pairs of Richmond Road villas were here by 1889, although the rest of Richmond Road wasn't really developed until about 1912. These villas with their pressed tiles, decoration, must have enjoyed an absolutely wonderful view. But this view was entirely obliterated by the building of Temple Towers. 1933 is the date on these attractive arts and crafts maisonettes. And this is just some of the detail inside the courtyard. So the Richmond Road facade is totally a mass of pipes. It's totally the back of the building, but inside is a courtyard. They are really beautifully built. The doors and the brickwork and everything really makes them rather stunning. A visit by the 20th Century Society a few years ago, this was one of the sites that I suggested they go and look at, which they did. The architect was Musselwhite, so they were really nice. It's possible then to go through the back of Temple Towers and come out in Cromwell Road. And Cromwell Road has this rather large, fine house, which is called Tallyho House. And this is its front door. And it's been flat since the 1930s, but it began, this is a very early house. It sticks out well in front of the building line. And it was built by a coal and timber merchant called Gerald Stevens, who came from Bridport. And its original name was Bridport House. It became the home of a doctor, and the cottage, which is now a cottage, was built as stabling. Doctors without a horse of some sort weren't much use, really. It was converted to flats, as I said, in the 1930s. And again, an oral history, again from Millie Day. She remembered Dr. Bethel, who lived in Tallyho Lodge, who was kind to her sick mother, who had to go into Basingstoke Infirmary in Basingstoke Road, which of course was the old workhouse infirmary, where she got her tea in an enamel mug, and she was able to take in a china one instead. It cost 30 shillings a week, which the family had to find to keep her mother in the hospital. These are interesting, these little stories. Most corner plots in Southview had a single large house, and the Cromwell Sherbourne Road corner was no exception. And this is a view of Cromwell House, as it was unimaginatively called, which Terry Hunt, I assume he photographed this probably for the owners. All that survives today is the front part of the front wall. The railings went long ago, but this rendered wall is still there. Further down Sherbourne Road now and into Burgess Road. Burgess Road Hall was built as a Catholic mission church in 1878 to provide for the Irish families who'd come to the town when the railway was made. It served as a mass centre for many years, but eventually in 1903, the Holy Ghost Church opened. Like many others who travelled the railway, Canon Alexander Joseph Scholes knew the history of the Holy Ghost and Holy Trinity ruined chapels. By 1900, the town had no resident priest. Canon Scholes was an architect as well as a priest and had already built a church in Yeovil, which actually looks very like the Holy Ghost Church. It was his decision to build Basingstoke a Catholic church. The builder was Joseph Tigwell. By the end of 1901, Canon Scholes had moved into the new presbytery attached to the church. He died in 1920 and is buried outside the church which he had built. And this is the Lady Chapel, has a rather battered statue of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. And this is a Terry Hunt picture. So this is Kingsclear Road. There's Burgess Road, and we're looking at the church and the attached presbytery, which has survived and is flats. During the First World War, the Belgian royal family who were living at Hackwood Park attended Mass here. Burgess Road was damaged by a bombing raid on the 16th of August 1940, when bombs fell in both Church Square and Burgess Road, as seen in this photo. I was given this photo by somebody after their brother had died. Their brother had been an auxiliary fireman, and the story was he should never have taken this photograph, but he had it. So as soon as this chap's brother died, he was able to give me this photo. There's an infill of newer houses where the damaged ones were demolished. After this raid, an unexploded bomb blew up the ARP Wardens post just by the Burgess Road entrance to the cemetery, which with their grim humour they thought rather funny. This is Burgess Road looking towards Sherbourne Road, and you can see here these pillars that there was a nice entry to the cemetery, which certainly isn't there today, but no doubt if there were any railings they would have gone. The ARP hut was about here, and the two cement rendered houses that I showed you at the beginning of these here, but of course in black and white, and they wouldn't have been painted then anyway, I imagine. So John Burgess Soper, to come back to him again, because he's unavoidable, here he is selling more of Southview. By this time you can see that the site of Southview House has been nibbled away. So here we've got Soper Grove houses, here we've got a couple of houses. This up here is the hunting stables chap, and here we've got a couple of houses. And here we have a view of Soper's house, which is difficult to see, and another one of a house called Keltersbury. Anyway, John Burgess Soper was a chap who seemed to relish a good fight with others and always seemed to be ending up in court, much more than others might. I think he was probably what we'd call litigious. He was a mayor and an alderman and on all sorts of committees, one of which was the Burial Board, which oversaw the improvements to Southview Cemetery, the new mortuary chapels, which are rather splendid, really. Certainly they are on paper. The new mortuary chapels, one for Episcopalians and one for nonconformists, and the lodge, which were bought, I reckon, more or less off plan from a firm called Poulton and Woodman in Reading. And here at the top is the lodge, which survives. and the 2 chapels were demolished in the early 1960s. I think probably because they'd become unstable. Soper there was a dispute within the burial board about a failure to consecrate the ground, which I think was something he didn't believe in. But much worse was a confrontation with the occupant of Southview House. It took place in 1882 and was thought to be because, as I showed on the auction plan, Soper was chipping away at the land and cottages on the site of Southview House. Dr. Arthur Croker, a retired naval surgeon, make of that what you will, was the occupant of Southview House, and during the altercation he had got an iron bar from the stable. He pushed him, John Burgess Soper, over with this. This is from the Gazette, from the Hanson Barks Gazette. Words used by Dr. Croker were unfit for publication, and John Burgess Soper called him a dirty beast for his language. The magistrates would not send the case for trial as grievous bodily harm, but treated it as common assault. There were, according to the report, loud cheers at this decision, which suggests that Soper was not popular. Later that year, Soper was charged with perjury and accused of not being as badly injured as he had said following the assault. There were a string of witnesses who had seen him out walking when he said he had been confined to his house for 3 days. The case ended up at the Queen's Bench at Westminster, and it was proposed that the case should not have been dismissed by the justices. Common assault was too trivial, and Dr. Croker should not have been acquitted. After this, Soper sold a bit of land at the east of Southview House to a friend of his, John Fencott. And this is described thus by George Willis. Fencott Place was built by John Fencott, a coach builder and a personal friend of John Burgess Soper, it is said, as a deliberate annoyance to Dr. Croker of Southview House, who subsequently protected his amenities by the erection of a very high wall. These 12 cottages in 3 parallel rows, dating from about 1885, have indeed a very high wall on their boundary with the site of Southview House, which you can see in this picture. And this is a view of the cottages, again with the high wall. They're very sweet, tucked away. And all over the cottages, we see this little medallion of Soper's. And actually, there's also one of these built into a wall in Cromwell Road where the late Derek and Margaret Wren lived. They've got one in their garden wall, but I'm not sure quite how. So as I said, 1885, Soper was auctioning again, and the new houses he built on what had been Southview House. He built a new house for his daughter Rosa Ellen and her husband Charles Cooksey. While excavating the footings of this house, the remains of a Celtic kist burial were found, and the finds are in the Reading Museum, with other finds made by Cooksey, an auctioneer by trade, but a keen archaeologist and historian. It was after this find that the new home was named Keltersbury. It's not there anymore. Soper later went on to build Hillside, as we know, and he built Gladstone Villas. So we know his politics. He was what's called a Gladstonian liberal. These houses in Soper Grove, which are rather splendid. And these do have stone staircases, for sure. Although ironically, there was a fire in one of them where somebody did die. Soper's house, Hillside, is now where Sylvania Court is today. And here it is, all wrecked. There were some similarities between Hillside and Southview House. They both had a tower room and stone staircases, like as I said, as did Gladstone Villas. The house where Soper did live, this house, was demolished when Sylvania Court was built in the 1980s. It was sometimes called Soper's Castle because of the crenellations. The only photo which survives shows the house after the Massaganian rioters had chucked stones at the windows and tried to burn it down when they were on the rampage in November 1881. The events of that day are well recorded in Bob Clark's The Basingstoke Riots. A terrifying and drunken mob surged through the town. identifying the homes and businesses of those who opposed them, and cheering at the houses of those who had supported them, reaching Soper's house, where only his daughter Sarah and their maid Amy were in the house, apart from Mrs. Soper's invalid sister, who was upstairs in bed. The women barricaded the house as best they could. 12 windows were broken, and the mob tried but failed to set fire to the house. When Soper returned, he said that 53 large stones were inside the house. I think this tells us that Soper, whose religious affiliations are not known, was in sympathy with the teetotal nonconformists on the council and magistrates rather than the brewers. In fact, Soper was even-handed. He offered land to the Catholics in Southview when others disapproved, and also to St Michael's, who for land for a mission church. But eventually they had a house which was, I think, used by the curates in Sherbourne Road, which is called appropriately St Raphael's. Soper also endowed these almshouses, which are just next to the Chapel Street Railway Arch. And as you all know, the foundation stone is in the museum now. His grave in Southview has this on it: "A good life hath its number of days, but a good name shall continue forever." This is Phoenix Park Terrace. So Phoenix Park Terrace is a neat development, 21 cottages from about 1878. A similar proposal for terrace houses on what is now Vine Meadow car park never happened. This land had been dumped with soil after the Great Western Railway construction, and later was acquired for the auction run by Rainbird. I remember it being covered with cattle pens and occasionally with livestock. This is a milk cart from Southview, because the dairy was in Southview, just down where the flats are next to the Great Western. So around 1921, council houses were built in the triangle between Sherbourne and Kingsclear Roads. Attractive houses with, can't see it too much here, but they with attractive cat slide roofs, big gardens. Vine Road has not significantly changed since then. And here's Chapel Hill, so we see this connection. So this is the arch which was widened early on in 1878. But this, I believe, was already there, existed as a tunnel entrance round to the Great Western Railway Station at the rear of what is now the station. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for this, for listening to my talk. One other survivor is in the North Car Park, is Great Western Railway stables, which we managed to get onto the local list, and then our car balloting business. Many of the large houses on the corner plots have disappeared, but I hope you will agree that the area contains some curious and intriguing buildings. Thank you.